Hey YouTube, it's your boy Alex S and I'm back on another video. Today we're going to be doing something a little different. I know we did it like a try not to get scared. I know we done a couple of those. Or one, I don't remember. But we're going to be reacting to 13 True Horror Stories Animated. Without further ado, let's get straight to this video.
Number 13. I am not one to have a great memory. Most things from my childhood I tend to forget, but this little event I could never forget. So it starts off in Texas at a relative's farm at least 14 years back during the summer. My family and I were starting to move, and since my brother and I were kinda small and not exactly helpful with moving stuff like furniture, we had to stay with our aunt, who was my dad's sister, and my uncle, who recently married my aunt and their son. I was around 6 years old and my cousin was 12, and my brother was 14. The three of us used to help out with many of the animals that were at the farms to waste time. But whenever our aunt and uncle say they didn't need our help, we would run off and do our own thing, which in other words meant going out with our slingshots. This one day our uncle told us that we could stay out as late as we wanted, so this meant we didn't have to come back before sundown like we usually did. The three of us, my cousin, my brother, and I, decided that we were going to go out as far as we possibly could from that farm and practice with our flimsy slingshots. Looking back at this, it's kind of funny how the three of us thought we could get anything and everything with a rickety slingshot. After a couple of hours of not finding anything and being at least a mile or two from the farm, we decided to go back. On the way back, we saw what we all thought was a coyote on the way back near the chicken pen. Seeing that it would take a long time to grab our uncle, the three of us with our flimsy slingshots tried to take care of it. Big mistake. The coyote turned around and started to slowly walk at us. The closer it got, the bigger it seemed to get, and soon I realized that it was not a coyote, but some sort of creature with some long wire-like hair, red all over its face. It was out of nowhere. My brother dropped his slingshot, grabbed me, and started bolting towards the house with our cousin following behind, screaming at us to run. I can't remember how long it took us to actually make it inside that house, but I was so happy to make it inside. Whatever that thing was, it stayed outside watching us. It wasn't until our aunt saw it outside did it leave. My aunt thought it was just a coyote, but my cousin was sure it was a skinwalker. Our uncle sided with him on whatever it was. My uncle was a Navajo and didn't joke about this stuff, but my brother, my aunt, and I weren't. My cousin, who grew up learning about these legends, kept telling him that it was a skinwalker until he was bawling his eyes out. Our uncle decided to believe him and fortify that house the best he could that night. The next day, we went outside and found all the chickens torn apart outside of their pens. My parents came that same day to pick up my brother and I, mainly because our uncle was calling them frantically and they worried about our safety. I rarely keep in touch with those relatives anymore due to my family moving all those years ago, and whenever I do, we never bring up the incident anymore, out of fear that it may have actually been a skinwalker.
Number 12. When I was 20 years old and my brother was 15, our parents were out of town. My brother had some friends over one night. As I walked out of the door to pick up food, I overheard them talking about the supernatural. What I didn't know was one of them had brought over a spirit board. While I was gone, they decided to call on the spirit.
Nah, I'm never doing that.
After a few times asking for a spirit to appear to them, they got their wish. The lights in the house went out. A low, eerie laugh consumed the whole house, and not one of the 7 could move. They all say they could see a shadow circling the table, but the light from the neighbor's house was dense. All of them knew they should run, yet they couldn't even move a finger. No one could speak, scream, or cry. As I pulled into the driveway, the 7 teenagers came running out in the house screaming and crying.
What you mean you can't move? You can always move, bro. I'm out that thing, bro.
I saw the blinds in the living room pull apart in the middle aggressively. Before I could process what I had seen, all of them were trying to tell me what had just happened. The front door suddenly slammed, knocking the already torn blind to the floor. Although you think that it would be the end of the story, but it's not. Someone still had to go back in the house, or at least lock the door. The 17s weren't an option,
Nah.
and I was the only
Forget the
adult in
door.
sight.
I'm gone, bro.
I
Forget
had my
the door.
brother go with
Why
me
y'all
since
walking,
this
bro?
is partly
I'm
his
dipping,
fault.
bro. I'm running.
We walked to the front door slowly, but both of us were breathing hard and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. As I put my fingers on the handle of the door, I thought about it like ripping off a Band-Aid. Just do it fast. I slung the door open with one swoop. The smell was unimaginable, and it hit us like a slap in the face. The odor was a mixture
I'll
of
tell you,
flowers and something
I'll
rotten.
never go back to that
It took
place,
us a
bro.
moment to overcome the horrific smell. Before entering the house, I tried to turn on the lights by the door. The outside light and the hall light turned on right away. I shouldn't have been surprised to see that the house was in shambles if I hadn't seen the blind rip open or see the door slam on its own. I would have thought my brother had entertained a wild party. As we entered the house, I began telling the entity in a loud, demanding voice, "Leave this home. You're not welcome here." As I spoke, I walked to where the spirit board was on the floor. When I picked up the board, I said, "This conversation has ended. Goodbye." The front door slammed on its own again, but the odor was gone. We cleaned up, and honestly, we never told my parents.
Of course.
Number 11. I was dating this one girl, a long distance relationship. She lived in Washington
again.
State while I lived in California. Long distance relationships usually involved the usual.
They usually never work.
FaceTiming, phone calls, Skype, etc. About 7 months into the relationship, I had a dream. The only member of her family I've seen on FaceTime was her cousin Zoe. In the dream, I was watching over her while she played in a bouncy house. Suddenly, she stopped and pointed. I looked into the direction she pointed. There was an old male, so old that gravity took a toll on his wrinkly skin. I locked eyes with him and I felt his piercing blue eyes freeze my body in place. He raised his hand from the resting place on his rocking chair. He pointed at me. His mouth opened wide as a sharp screeching noise came out of him. I woke up in a cold sweat, texting my girlfriend telling her the dream. She was shocked. She texted back, "You saw Grandpa?" She later explained that her late grandpa's appearance perfectly fit my dream. What shocked us both was that I've never seen a picture of her grandfather, let alone knew that he passed away. He would always stay in his rocking chair and look out the window during his final days, she said. Can ghosts communicate through dreams? Can I see ghosts? Are ghosts real? I don't know if any of these will ever be answered, but I hope one day I can understand.
Number 10. So this happened about 2 years ago, almost 3, when I was a freshman in high school. I never had much faith in the afterlife or the paranormal. Anyways, I never had much of a hard time sleeping. However, during the second week of my winter break, it was becoming really difficult to sleep. I remember one night I had woken up to a loud bang. At first I thought it was a shot, which wouldn't have been surprising since I live in a rough neighborhood in East Los Angeles. But then I heard another bang that
Why you
came
look
from
like you're in the
outside
forest
my door.
then, bro?
I slowly made my way out of bed, and I looked over at my alarm clock, which read 2:53 a.m. I thought maybe it could be my mom or my older brother. But then I remembered my mom was working until 8 o'clock, and my brother was at his girl's house. With a racing heart, I grabbed the bat that I hid under my bed, and I waited, thinking it could be an intruder. I held my breath waiting for another sound, but nothing happened for the rest of the night. The next day I told my family about it, and they just joked about it. They joked that it was the devil checking on me, and ultimately, they paid no mind to it. It wasn't until around midnight that I heard a bang again. This time, I was awake, and I rushed to where I heard the sound, which led me to my bathroom. I opened the bathroom door and I looked inside only to see nothing. I jumped when I heard the sound of glass breaking. It came from my kitchen and I saw that at least 4 plates had fallen off of the cabinet.
You got a
or
ghost in
shattered
here,
on
bro.
the floor.
I'm dipping.
It scared me
Forget
because
that house,
those
bro. I'm
plates
gone.
couldn't have fallen on their own.
Go to my
because
neighbor's house.
There was a latch that
Nah.
kept the cabinet shut.
We ain't
I
doing this.
inspected the cabinet to see if the latch was broken, but
Hold
it
on.
wasn't.
Let me show you, bro.
The activity continued throughout the rest of the break, but most of it was childish. There would be knocks in one room, and then another. Like if someone was messing with me. I would have my hair tugged, and some mornings, old family pictures would be broken. My mom even said that she heard a little kid crying when she was in the house alone. Then one day she revealed to me that the previous owners of the house had a 3-year-old son who had passed away in a tub when the mother had left him alone to answer the phone. After the boy's passing, the parents had sold the house to my family and were never heard from again. At first I didn't believe it, but then I remembered the knocking coming from the bathroom. Needless to say, it pushed me to believe in the afterlife more, and now the activity doesn't bother me anymore. To me, it's just a little boy who doesn't know he's passed and just wants to play. I hope that I'm able to catch some activity on video, and I'll post it.
Number 9. My whole life I'd had paranormal experiences, so over the years I've grown used to them. One particular paranormal experience is something that gives me nightmares to this day. When I was between the ages of 5 and 11, my family lived in a small apartment building. My sister and I shared one bedroom, while my brother had the other. Both my parents slept in the living room downstairs. I would go downstairs every night to get water or a snack if I was hungry, and I never got scared because my parents were just feet from the kitchen
Never mind, I can't
sleeping.
find it, bro. I couldn't find
remember
it.
that night I woke up in the middle of the night as usual and went downstairs to the kitchen to get water.
What up, is
Our
it
kitchen
here?
had an odd half wall, so even if you were feet from it, you could still see the whole kitchen. I remember I had passed my parents who were sleeping at the time and made it just feet from the kitchen where I had been able to see the sink and window just above it. I didn't even make it to the kitchen. In front of the sink where the window was shining in lights from outside, I saw a dark-haired woman looking out the window. I remember standing there for what felt like hours,
Bro, you wanna go to my
but it
house,
only
bro?
lasted about 10
Get it creased up,
seconds.
my guy.
The woman just stood there not moving for a few more
That is
seconds, and before I could even think of what to do next, this woman started bending weirdly, like her bones were breaking but no sound was audible. I stared at her not knowing what to do at the time. Before I could react, the woman turned completely and looked towards me. Her face was completely blacked out. I ran past my parents
run.
and back up to my bedroom. Let's just say I got no sleep
What?
that night. Since then, my family
Bro,
has
go to your
moved from that
parents' room. What's the
apartment
first thing you should do?
complex.
Wake up
and
everybody
to this
in your
day,
house.
10 years later, I can still see that woman so clearly in my head, and I hope I never encounter her again.
Number 8. About a couple of months ago, around October, I wanted to make a Halloween video with some friends. We wanted to film a short film about a psycho in the woods. We went to my local woods where we were looking for a good spot to film. We ended up going down a small ravine to film. Everything was normal until we noticed some weird objects above the part of the ravine, so we went to go check it out. We climbed uphill from the ravine, where we found a small shelter, something that a man built to sleep in.
But I'm out.
Around
Nah.
the small shelter,
Nah.
there were dolls hung around it,
Nah, bro.
deformed and
I'm
almost
done.
satanic-like. The dolls were really unpleasant and made us uncomfortable. However,
Bro, when I tell you I'm
it
out that
looked
thing,
good
I'm
for our
gone, my
film,
guy.
so we started filming there until
Nah, they
we
dead.
kept hearing noises
They dead,
around
my
us,
guy.
and our anxiety was getting
Y'all
too
dead.
high, so we just booked it out of there.
Better.
We still filmed at the bottom of the ravine, but now with more friends. They didn't believe what we found, so we took them to see the dolls. We didn't hear anything, but some of our friends got really anxious, so we left. But me personally, I don't believe in paranormal stuff, but I did leave with scratches on my back that I did not feel until we left the woods. I have footage of us finding the dolls in the woods and pictures of the scratches on my back. It was really unpleasant finding those scratches though. I went back recently to see if the dolls were still there with a friend of mine, but they were gone. But the shelter was still there. I don't know if there was a psycho living in the woods, but who will ever know, honestly.
Number 7. This is a
I'm
true
done. This man
story.
went back.
Sorry if it's a bit long. My mother passed away in 2015. I visit her grave on occasions to leave flowers and think about her.
What's wrong
I've
with
had
your
an
eyes?
unusual
Oh, those
life
are
in
glasses.
many ways, and this is but one tale in a sea of many. This may be the first of them, or at least the earliest one I was told. Mom was buried in our family plot that also includes my grandparents at a local but secluded cemetery. During one of my visits over the summer, I recalled a story my mother had told me a few years earlier, long before she too would join them there. At the time, I had no memory of the following story, as I was 3 when the event occurred. After she told me, I did start to remember parts of it, which I had blocked out due to a combination of being young and how traumatic this was. My grandfather passed away when I was only a year old in 1972. My mother had been very close to him and it had affected her deeply. For most of my childhood, my mother and I would visit his grave in the cemetery, leave flowers and trim grass away from his headstone. We had gone to place a Christmas wreath on this particular trip. It was winter and we had gone late in the day. Typical for that time of year, the days were short and the sun was dipping low in the sky. While my mother did her usual tending of his headstone, I wandered nearby among the neighboring graves. At my very young age, I understood that people were laid to rest and understood the concept of passing on. My mother had explained this to me somewhat early, probably to help me understand who we went there for and why. In my 3-year-old mind, I imagined skeletons buried underground. I was not afraid of the cemetery or graves. However, as this was a ritual we had done numerous times and had become somewhat routine. At some point on this trip, while wandering, my foot had slipped into a hole and became stuck. My mother heard me crying and ran to find my foot lodged into the headstone of a nearby grave. The headstones were bronze with a marble border. They featured a bronze vase you could unscrew and pull out of the headstone, invert and use to fill with flowers. This grave, however, was missing its vase, leaving only an empty hole. My foot had become wedged into the hole, and trying as she could, my mother could not get my foot out. Meanwhile, the sun was starting to set. It was getting dark quickly. She told me I was hysterical at this point. I do recall now, thinking in my 3-year-old's mind that a skeleton had reached up and was grabbing my foot from somewhere beneath the grave. All I could think about was that it wanted to drag me down into the grave and keep me there. My mother had also become frantic, seeing the very real possibility of me being stuck in the graveyard at night. She left me to try and find the groundskeeper. She was unable to locate any people because due to winter, the staff was minimal. Then during the warmer months, after what felt like an eternity, she returned to me. She told me she could hear me screaming the whole time she had been searching for help. In a moment of desperation, she yanked me as hard as she could, and my foot popped out of my shoe, freeing me from the hole. I clearly remember this part, and can picture seeing the small, heart-souled child's shoe wedged at an angle in the vase hole. We then left after this, however I don't remember much after that point. I had never heard this story up until about 2012, when my mother recalled it to me. She had been surprised I started to recall details after she told it to me. It had shocked me when I actually started to remember these long buried memories. I still miss and think about my mother every day, but I do sort of wonder if there were any other stories she never told me. Considering how many years it took her to bring this one up, and the fact she is gone now, I guess I will never really know.
Number 6. This is a story about a girl in my high school. I go to high school just like any normal person would, but I was having a little trouble with my grades. So I started staying after school to do a little extra work to bring my grades up. But I've noticed in school that there has been this quiet girl that attended tutoring along with 8 other people. The thing is, I would always see her staring at me, never taking her eyes off of me. I really didn't mind it, but
I be like, what you
it
need,
felt
bro?
really creepy.
What you
This
need?
kept going on for about 2 weeks.
Like what you see or
At
something?
this
You
point, I
need
was
something?
feeling very uncomfortable.
Nah,
One day
bro.
when school ended and tutoring started, I sit as far away as possible from her. We go home at around 6 p.m. And this day I got on the bus like usual. There was only one bus because there aren't so many people. And as usual, I would sit as far away as possible from her. But that day, when I got off my bus stop, she got off too. This was weird as she always got off at a different bus stop. But I really didn't pay any attention to it. I thought
Now she
maybe
trying to
she
find where
changed
you
her bus
live. She's
stop
trying to find
or
out where you
something,
live.
I don't know. I
Nah,
really didn't
bro.
think about it. It
Yo,
was getting dark, and it was about a 1-mile walk from my bus stop to my home.
you haven't said
But I
nothing
noticed
to
that
her?
the girl has been following me for about 2 minutes, and I didn't know why. This, of course, bothered me, but there wasn't really much I could do. I just ignored her, minded my own business, and I kept walking. 2 minutes later, I noticed that she kept following me. I started to get the feeling that maybe she was lost or something. It was dark.
Bro,
And
I'm
then she
gonna
started
start
talking
yelling
to
like,
herself.
do you need
She was
something, bro?
acting
Why you
really
following
weird,
me?
and I just wanted to ignore it, but she kept whispering to herself. I could hear mumbling. The sound was getting closer and closer, so I picked up the pace. When I picked up the pace, she also did too.
Bro, you black.
She
You better
let out a scream
you
that
better
was so
start hitting.
loud that it almost made me pee
Bro,
my
you
pants.
better put
I
up
started
these
sprinting.
hands right
She
here,
went
bro,
chasing after
and
me.
start swinging on me,
I
bro.
was
I
getting
swear,
scared, so I
bro.
ran around the neighborhood. I didn't want her to go to my house because she would know where I live. Around the corner, I saw a bush large enough for me to hide in. Then she stopped as she thought that she lost me. When she stopped, she took a deep breath and she ran away. I stayed there for about 5 more minutes just to make sure. I was thinking to myself that this girl was insane and had some mental problems. After this horrifying experience, I didn't go to after-school tutoring again.
Number 5. On November 4th, 2017, my grandmother had passed away. It wasn't until December when we moved into the old family house. My family and I, resting after a day of hard work, sat down in the living room with some old items of my grandmother's. Once we had all sat
Your
down,
house
an old
haunted,
music
bro.
box started to play slowly,
Your house
with the
haunted,
little
bro.
figures jerking instead of moving peacefully. We realized at once that this was the lost relative trying to get in contact with us, but as soon as one of us left the room, it stopped and started when we came back. We soon realized the house was haunted with spirits of the many generations of our family that had built and lived here.
Number 4.
No,
I
I
live
did.
in rural Kentucky. Southeast Kentucky to be exact. I was staying with my aunt and uncle up in Mount Vernon, Kentucky, along with my aunt's great-great-aunt named Leela. I was between the ages of 6 and 8 at the time, and Leela was around her late 80s or early 90s and was sadly in poor health. Doctors have refused her treatment due to her age and overall health. She's about 5'3", 200 pounds and wheelchair bound, so they opt for setting up hospice in my aunt's house, allowing her to live out her days. Anyways, I had slept on the couch the days I were there, and leading to their back porch were the sliding glass doors. They always kept blinds over them and had an alarm system and kept the doors locked, so I wasn't really worried because, even as a kid, I knew what break-ins were. Needless to say, I was pretty freaked out when I was awakened by low tapping sounds on the glass doors. It was daylight, so I thought nothing of it. I kind of assumed it was one of the stray dogs that roamed the area, and that their tail was hitting the glass. Not long after that, I saw a shadow through the blinds.
Nah, I'm waking
No
up.
eyes,
Everybody,
no features.
everybody in the house is waking
Just
up
a
now,
really
bro.
tall shadow.
Nah,
Well, I thought it was my uncle
I'm getting
just
everybody.
leaving to go to work.
I'm getting
So I went
everybody
back to
up, bro.
sleep. I awoke later to find out that A, it was Saturday and he had the day off, and B, it snowed all night and there were no footprints at all. My aunt was freaked out and couldn't really let me sleep on the couch after that. You skip forward a day or two and I'm at home when our phone rings. It was my aunt calling to tell my mom that Leela had died. That in itself was kind of spooky, given the fact that my aunt thought that I had seen an apparition. But the kicker, Leela was sitting on the couch I had slept on, and she just slumped over. My little cousin Emily, who was around 4 or 5 at the time, screamed and began blabbering about the dark man over Leela. Needless to say, everyone now tells anyone I bring home about the time I saw the Reaper.
Number 3. This is a couple of stories from when I was alone in a house down the street from where I live now. 1. I was home alone for the afternoon one summer day. It was towards the end of summer, so I was being lazy and watching TV in the living room. My parents were out somewhere and my brother was at a friend's. I kept getting paranoid a bit as I was only 15 at the time. I constantly checked out the windows and made sure the doors were locked as I kept getting a feeling I was being watched. Then the noises began. I kept hearing thumps in the attic, and I got scared as the only way to the attic was through my closet in my room, as it only had a cover lid for it. I sat on the couch and tried to ignore the sounds. After a while, it stopped, but then I started to hear talking in the back room of the house. The weird part is, no one was home. I put the TV on mute, and it sounded like a male and female. So I got up and slowly went to the back room to check, only to find no one there. By then, I was really scared. I ran to the living room and curled up, sitting there in complete silence as I didn't know what to do. It was alright for a minute until I jumped by the sound of 3 knocks on the front door, only 5 feet from my left.
Call
I
somebody.
reluctantly went to check through the peephole to find no one at the door or down the street. I immediately called my parents after that, and they arrived an hour later. 2.
I know
It
y'all
was
saw that
late
black
at night
shadow,
in the
bruh.
same old house. Me and my brother were alone for the night. When my parents went out to eat, during the night, everything went as normal, but then I noticed things moving on their own. The washer would have its lid open right after I closed it, the keys would move, and clothes would go missing. The scariest thing happened that night. As I was going to bed, I looked outside my doorway to see a figure that appeared to be a shadow person standing there. I hid in my covers, and ever since then, I always sleep with my door closed at night.
Number
Nah,
2.
wake up
So about
everybody
3
in your
weeks ago, I
house.
started having these strange dreams, often involving little things happening in a different order than usual. It started off pretty normal. My school bus came down my street from an abnormal direction. For some reason, this stuck with me. The dreams were kind of, like an anthology. The second dream followed the next night. The dream started the same, but this time, I got on the bus. People's faces were just blurry, and an odd middle-aged man sat behind me, which is off seeing as how it's a school bus. The man whispered to me, but I didn't understand what he said. The next night, I had the same dream, but a few minor differences. This time I understood what he said. Remember, don't ask questions. I really didn't understand what he meant by that. The next day I sat in class. I kind of fell asleep during the lecture in my psychology class. The dream continued where it left off. The strange man stood up and the bus flipped. Before I woke up, he kept repeating a name. I didn't understand it. When I woke up, my mom was calling me and I stepped outside of the classroom, so I had to answer. My mother informed me that my estranged father had passed. She sent me a link of the obituary. There was a picture of the strange man. Was it some kind of intuition, or my mind playing tricks on me? After that, the dream stopped. I still haven't figured out what the last thing he said was. I guess I'll never know. Number 1. My name is Valentine and I live in Windsor, Ontario. This is a horrific story that happened to me, and I'm willing to share it with you. I feel I need to get this out, so here it goes. This story happened about a decade ago. My mom was acquainted with this weird but nice guy named Michael. They would often hang out and she introduced me to him at some point. I noticed a creepy vibe when I was around him, but as I got to know him more, I really didn't care. He even got me a real dream catcher, as I was into that kind of stuff, and it's got me to respect him. However, there was this one day my mom was at her friend's house, and I was home alone. Michael was driving a minivan and pulled up to the driveway and started honking his horn for my mom. I went outside to tell him that she wasn't home. He grinned at me. He grinned like he was going to get what he wanted. Well, I think he did because he asked me if I wanted to go get some ice cream. And I, being a little kid, didn't know better. I said yes. He told me to hop on in. I got in and we drove down to this place called Dairy Delight. To be fair, we actually did get ice cream, but the car ride back was just weird. We started driving in a direction I wasn't familiar with. I asked him where we were going. His response was, "We're going to see your mom." He said that with a dark smile on his face. But that didn't make any sense. My mom was busy during this day, and there's no way she would have been able to be picked up by this guy. I started feeling a pain punch in my stomach. I nervously said, "Maybe we should go back to my house." And he turned back to me and glared. After glaring at me for about 5 to 10 seconds, he said in a very dark tone, "No." I noticed he was pulling over, and there was a guy standing on the road with his thumb out. Michael pulled over and told him that he would drive him to wherever he was headed. The guy got in the van, and we drove off in what felt like a hurry. For the record, I was in the back seat. Michael and this guy both smiled and looked at each other, then at me. This guy was messy, wearing a stained green shirt and cuts on his pants. The two were talking back and forth to each other about stuff I don't even remember, but they seemed to be getting along like they knew each other. I already could tell that Michael knew this guy. He wasn't a hitchhiker. I was scared out of my mind. I wanted to go home. I failed to notice this earlier, but
Hey,
in the
bro,
way
you
back
finna-
of Michael's
finna get
van,
raped, bro.
there were pictures. What scared me
Understand,
straight was
man.
one of the pictures.
Probably
of
not.
me.
Probably gonna get
It
sold
looked
or
like it was
something.
me walking home from school. I finally realized what Michael's true colors were. I started crying and screaming for someone to help me, and the two up front started laughing at me. I saw a wrench that was on the floor of Michael's van.
A pedophile.
I quickly thought of what I had to do. I picked up the wrench and swung the van window open and screamed for my life. The hitchhiker tried grabbing me, but I chumped on his hand and he let out the most horrific scream I've ever heard. Michael slammed on the brakes and I jumped out. The van didn't move an inch while I was running away. I was able to get help from a nearby pedestrian, and she helped me to my place where we called my mom and the cops. Turns out Michael had spent time behind bars for what he had done to other children. My mom rushed home when she heard the news. She was mad at me for going with him, but she was very happy I was safe and cried while holding me. Michael was found at his sketchy apartment and was arrested later that day. Unfortunately, they never found the guy he picked up. I don't know where Michael is today, but I hope he's rotting behind bars for other reasons because no kid should have to go through that again.
But yeah, that's gonna do it for the video, guys. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'm out. Peace.